Welcome to Grow Virtually, an online horticultural educational program presented by the Master Gardener Volunteers of Cobb County. Under the guidance of the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension Service, we grow gardeners.
Shelly Carey, who is speaking on invasives, remove and replace.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. My name is Shelly Carey. I've been a master gardener since 2021. Love gardening, love getting my hands dirty like all of you do if you're here tonight. So we're going to be going through a lot of information tonight, discussing some common invasive plants. We aren't going to hit them all, but we'll hit some of the most common ones here in the Southeast. Tonight, we're going to discuss some categories of plants. What are native, non-native, and invasive plants? What's the difference between them? Does it really matter? And then how have humans interfered with different plant types, and what have they done? So these are some of the topics and issues we'll discuss today. So there are actually three major categories of plants we're going to discuss in this presentation. At a very high level, we can say native plants are indigenous and natural here in North America. Non-native plants that you'll see here in yellow are not from North America and were imported here. Non-native invasive plants are going to be shown in red. They are not from North America, and they are just outright bullies. Non-native invasive plants are also known as exotic and imported, just like the non-natives that you see in yellow there, but the invasive plants are also labeled as alien, weeds, noxious, bullies, and destructive. To make it easy, we color-coded these plant categories throughout this presentation. For native plants, we're giving the green light to those. You will see the green light on slides where any native plants are discussed, and then we coded non-native plants as yellow to be cautionary. Any non-native and invasive plants you will see in red. So what is a native plant? It occurs naturally here in North America. It exists without human intervention, and it existed thousands of years before Europeans came. These plants took care of themselves without any human help since the beginning of time. The early explorers' ship manifests arriving in North America included the plants that they brought with them, so we know with some accuracy when new plants arrived here. And now for non-native plants. These are the plants that have been introduced from other regions or countries. Whether brought here purposely or not, they were brought by humans on boats, clinging to animal fur in shipping containers, and other ways. Most non-native plants aren't a problem, and some are even considered beneficial. But if we're planting something, why not choose something that's best for our ecological zone and is native? Some food for thought as we dig in here further. So what is a non-native invasive plant? And as you can see here off to the left, we've got an arrow pointing to North America. So it's something that's being imported here. And this also has the red light, as you can see. These are the bullies. They are non-native invasive plants. They're imported like the last slide we saw, but these are just the bullies, and they do not play nice. In the word invasive, I see the word invade. Do you see that pretty purple flower here? It smells heavenly. Some say it even smells like grape soda or even grape Kool-Aid. You might have heard of this particular plant, which is described as the plant that ate the South. Yes, you guessed it. It is kudzu. These plants are so aggressive that they invade and change existing ecosystems. Kudzu is actually known to grow a foot a day. A gardening friend of mine once said, Mother Nature likes to be covered. If she is uncovered, she will cover herself. If native plants that naturally occur here have to go to battle with something non-native and invasive like kudzu to cover an area, you can guess who's going to win that battle. And then Mother Nature is completely covered. We'll look at examples from each of these categories in just a few. So it's important to note the difference here between, invasive plants and aggressive plants. Both of these plants are prolific, both go beyond their intended boundaries. While an invasive plant like kudzu is definitely an aggressive plant, a native plant should never technically be called invasive. Aggressive plants could also be called opportunistic or prolific. A native plant here on the right could be called aggressive, like native trumpet creeper, but never invasive. You will often hear the word, unfortunately, misused, invasive, when referring to native plants. We should limit our use of that word invasive to any plant that originated outside of North America or a specific region and is also considered a pest. It's also very important to note that some plants might be considered extremely aggressive in certain areas where in a different environment, that same plant changes drastically as far as the way that it acts. What might be a non-native but safe plant here in the Southeast may be known as an invasive species in Western states or somewhere else. This is why it's important when you move to a different location, maybe across country, why you should research the native plants there versus those that are invasive or aggressive before you plant anything. So there is actually a way that they classify invasiveness here. It's the Georgia Exotic Pest Plant Council, and they maintain a list of non-native exotic species on their website that's here, and we'll be sure to provide that link as well. So this category 1, you'll see the examples on the left-hand side, but these are serious problems. We've got Japanese honeysuckle, Japanese stiltgrass, Chinese privet, multiflora rose, and Chinese wisteria, all a serious problem here in our state and region. Category 1 alert examples below that, it says that they're not yet a serious problem, but we are on high alert for these plants. We've got Oriental bittersweet, Japanese knotweed, garlic mustard. And category 2, moderate problem, Vinca major, Vinca minor, sacred bamboo, which is also known as Nandina. We've got Japanese privet and Bermuda grass. Category 3 examples, leatherleaf mahonia, which we'll talk about later, peppermint, white mulberry, and rose of Sharon, which everybody loves rose of Sharon, right? But that's category 3, minor problem. Definitely not native. Category 4 examples, naturalized here in our area, not a threat, but this is what's ironic. The Cherokee rose, ironically our state flower, is a category 4 naturalized plant that it's invasive, not from here, but not a threat at this point. Red morning glory, you see that there as well as verbena. So we know how invasive plants and bullies, we know how invasive plants are bullies, and we know non-native plants aren't really that great, but why is it that native plants are best? Let's talk about that. So as you can see here on the top left, we are rolling out the welcome mat for native plants. We welcome them, we encourage them here in North America, and let's talk a little bit more about their characteristics. So native plants live in a specific area or native region and are part of an interdependent community known as an ecosystem. The success of those native plants depends on the climate specifically there, the geology, soil, water access, interaction with other plants, animals, insects, and microorganisms where they live. These plants are right at home there. Before Europeans came in the 15th century, Native Americans built communities of plants, insects, and animals to help them establish and maintain their very unique ecosystems. It's important to note if you take the plants out of their ecosystem, they might not survive. Ellen Honeycutt, who is chairman of the Georgia Native Plant Association, will be our next speaker in our Grow Virtually series, and she's going to speak on October 6th at 2 p.m. about native plants. We hope you can attend that session, and you can register for that class on our website, but we're going to focus more on invasive plants during this presentation. So how did it come to be where we're at the point where invasives are so prevalent and we need to be worried about keeping all of these native plants in our ecosystem and maintaining the ecosystems the way that they are? Interference. When settlers arrived humans began to have an increasingly significant role regarding ecosystems because of those settlers. Those settlers moved natives to new locations. They removed them altogether. And then they also introduced new plants. Whether they introduced those plants purposely or by accident, we just don't know. But today, more than ever, the continuing destruction of our own natural environments for agriculture and urban use increases the importance of habitat protection and ecological preservation. So I want to briefly talk about one of our Cobb Master Gardener projects that is within Cobb County, where you can see examples of these plants in person: invasives, non-invasives, and native plants. The Jean and Elwood Wright Environmental Education Center is actually on 19 acres in East Cobb. It's managed by Cobb County Parks. It's right there on Johnson Ferry, and you can check out your local ecosystem right there. Beautiful walking trails. It's gorgeous. So it's one of the projects where Cobb Master Gardener volunteers are guiding the restoration of the grounds back to a more ecologically balanced system. They are removing vines and trying to let natives thrive there. It's some hard work, but that's exactly what they're doing. So this property provides an example of what you can do in your very own backyard and ecosystem. You should visit sometime. At the Wright Center, you can even visit a plant jail, like a prison, where you can see examples of those thuggish invasive plants that were found on the property there. They've done a great job clearing away the invasive plants, like I said, to let those native plants thrive. And here we see a picture of that plant jail located at the Wright Center. So let's get down to those thugs, the non-native invasive plants. And you know they're aggressive too. So within these slides coming up here, we've identified a dirty dozen that are known to be aggressive, known to be invasive. We want to pull them out and get rid of them every chance we see them. We've got the red light here. We got to stop these from going any further. So here you can see a well-known thug, one of America's most wanted, or should I say, Pereira, Montana, known as kudzu. He's standing outside of that plant jail that you can visit there at the Wright Center. And where we have, as you can see in the pots there within the jail, quite a few of his fellow culprits there. Steer clear of any non-native invasive plants. Although invasive plants weren't clearly identified until 1999, they have been around the U.S. for over 200 years. Researchers have known that since the 1960s, there were plants in the U.S. that had become a threat to the native environments in this country. But it wasn't until 1999 that this issue became important enough to attract the attention at the highest level. In 1999, President Bill Clinton signed an executive order to coordinate a federal strategy to address the growing environmental and economic threat of invasive species. These plants have come to be known simply as invasive. Again, I think it is worth mentioning that a native plant can also be aggressive, but a plant is only considered invasive if it was imported and came from somewhere else. So let's consider now how and why invasives got to the US. Believe it or not, some were accidentally introduced. Here is an example of Japanese stilt grass, which came to Tennessee in 1919 as a packing material found around porcelain. Since then, it has spread to many states. Again, that Japanese stilt grass, it's actually an annual, which is good news. It doesn't respond well to herbicides, unfortunately, but it's very easy to pull up. Try to pull it up before it seeds if you do see this in your yard. Seeds do stay viable in the soil for up to 2 years. I definitely have some work cut out for myself in my own yard. This is just a tiny little sliver of what I got is overtaken a creek bank. But the negative effects of this existing in your landscape, it covers native species, reduces their growth and flowering, suppresses native plant communities, reduces number of insects, persists through late spring into late summer, alters plant succession, reduces availability of nutrients for other native species. The good news is that eradicating it requires very little digging and leads to total recovery of the ecosystem if you remove it. More non-native invasive plants. The biggest reason invasive plants were imported to the United States was actually for aesthetic reasons. They were considered beautiful ornamental plants. So here on the left-hand side, you'll see Nandina domestica, which is also known as heavenly bamboo. It's native to Eastern Asia and India, and the plant's spread by underground runners. Animals and birds scatter berries that sprout and root as well. It invades forests throughout the southeastern United States. Nandina berries contain cyanide, which is poisonous to cedar waxwings, a specific bird here. Around 2011, dozens of these cedar waxwings died in Thomas County, Georgia. When UGA investigated, they found the birds, the bodies of the birds were found with whole berries in their stomachs and hemorrhaging in the heart, lungs, trachea, and abdominal cavity. The Audubon Society issued warnings about Nandina, saying that dogs, cats, other small animals have also gotten sick and died. Although a good volume of the berries have to be ingested to cause fatality. It was determined that year, specifically in 2011, that cedar waxwings died because they gorged themselves on Nandina berries that year for whatever reason. Maybe other food was scarce. So there are some newer varieties of Nandina that are non-fruiting. So they're going to be more safe because they are sterile. They do not produce berries. So they're not as likely to invade your landscape, and they'll stay put a little more than heavenly bamboo will. Those varieties, you'll see them in nurseries like Firepower, First Blush, Obsession. They aren't considered native plants, but again, they wouldn't have the ability to be nearly as harmful to birds because they don't have those berries on them. The Nandina that I showed you in my yard earlier, I did not plant that. It's next to a creek, so who knows if it was brought downstream by seed or washed up on the shore, or if a bird, deposited something there. So it just shows you that regardless of how far from an Nandina bush you might live, you might have one pop up in your yard unexpectedly. Here on the right-hand side, we've got Chinese wisteria. Wisteria sinensis. It's another example of an invasive plant that was brought here due to its beauty. They are gorgeous. And I was going to play this video, but I'm hearing that there may not be a good volume on the video here. But I've got an American version or American variety of wisteria here along the creek. And this variety is going to be a lot safer than the Chinese version. The Chinese wisteria is what you see in the spring that covers entire tree canopies. It's up to 90 feet in the air. It covers entire tree canopies and ends up killing the trees that are underneath it because it smothers them. So if you do like the purple flowers of Chinese wisteria, but you want to be safer and not plant something that's going to get out of control, you want to go for something like American wisteria. Different varieties are like Blue Moon is what I have planted here, which was just transplanted. You can't really see it. Or Amethyst Falls is another one. In 2016, Cobb County Parks cut down a Chinese wisteria at the Wright Center because it had wrapped itself around a cypress tree and it killed the tree. The following spring, master gardeners began battling that resprouting process of that same wisteria tree. The effort will continue for another few years, but they are making some good progress on that. So we don't recommend heavenly bamboo or Chinese wisteria in the landscape. So the best way to remove both of these is to cut above ground level, paint the cut stems with glyphosate, and just continue to do that until you see that it's going away and dying. I want to be sure to note here, though, I'm not one to prefer glyphosate usage in my yard, so I always try to dig plants out at the roots whenever possible. This prevents their return more than any other method I've found. You'll see glyphosate mentioned in this presentation, but you can always try to dig out the roots of any invasive plant before using a chemical like that, and use chemicals as a last resort. So I thought this meme on the left-hand side was pretty funny. This is Kathy Bates listening to a so-called friend telling me about the Bradford pear trees they had just planted. If you know about Bradford pears, they are prolific. So you can tell she's not loving the fact that her friends planted some Bradford pear trees. In this presentation, we focus more on invasive plants, not invasive trees, but I threw this in just for some fun, and it's also educational. So Bradford pears are not native to the US. They are definitely considered invasive. These trees were brought to the US actually as an ornamental. They're a cultivar of the Callery pear tree, brought to the US from China in the early 1900s. And they were brought as an ornamental tree, like I said, but they were also brought in an attempt to hybridize them and improve disease resistance of pear trees that were native here. It was believed that these trees would not be able to spread. Oh, how little they knew at that point. Different cultivars are able to cross-pollinate, and that allowed them to escape into our natural forest. These trees spread quickly, allowing them to outcompete native species. Because they produce leaves earlier than other trees, these pear trees can also shade out native plants. While they have very pretty white blooms in the spring, they stink to the high heavens. And if you know, you know. And they also have very brittle wood, being structurally weak. They are known to have limbs that easily break during storms. My neighbor's tree split right in half. They are actually so hated in North Carolina that the North Carolina Urban Forest Council has a bounty program there where they will actually give North Carolina homeowners up to 5 free trees for free if they cut down their Bradford pear trees. And tree service providers are actually even discounting the removal of Bradford pear trees there as well. They encourage planting native trees in their place, like flowering dogwood, black cherry, and serviceberry trees, which have similar blossoms. How bad does a plant or tree have to be that there's actually a bounty to get rid of it? All right, we have some more non-native invasive plants here. And these are all brought here because they were ornamental and then they became invasive. So here on the left, we've got leatherleaf mahonia. It's native to China. It's an evergreen shrub that forms dense thickets. It's actually a beautiful plant. I've seen one on the way into my subdivision. There's one planted on each side of someone's driveway, and they have it like with some landscape rocks around it, and they have purposely planted them there. I don't know how long they'll stay in that specific spot, but it invades woodlands at the edges when birds sit atop power lines and they leave droppings. It does have a beautiful green leaf on it, as well as berries that almost look like grape clusters. Sadly, you will still see this plant sold in local nurseries to unsuspecting customers who don't know how truly invasive it is. I also have one of these in my yard that was a volunteer that cropped up, and then a few years later, I see one that's 30 feet away. So I probably need to get on that and make sure that I dig that out completely, or I may be seeing other leatherleaf mahonia within my yard. There is a variety of this called soft caress mahonia, which isn't considered invasive, but it's also not a native plant. So Oriental bittersweet here in the middle is a fast-growing woody vine that can cover, shade, and outcompete native vegetation. Other plants decline around it due to the lack of light they get because this covers them. Asheville, North Carolina, not to be picking on North Carolina here, but it's said to be a hub for Oriental bittersweet invasion, marching out from that area, killing vegetation all along the way. It can constrict and girdle large trees and gradually kill them. The increased weight of the vine of Oriental bittersweet can cause a large tree to blow over in high winds. It's a threat because of its high reproductive rate. The roots sucker at every node, so that's a chance for it to put down roots and dig into the ground. So there's a very rapid growth rate there. To remove this, cut and paint the stem with glyphosate or dig out the roots again if possible. And I think everybody in the Southeast is familiar with this one, Japanese honeysuckle. And what an amazing smell that is, right? But it was first introduced in the late 1800s as an ornamental plant. Later, they were used for erosion control and wildlife cover. The vines grow rapidly and cover large areas. They shade out other native plants growing underneath and can girdle or pull down trees. To remove small strands of Japanese honeysuckle, just you can hand pull it in the spring when the soil is most moist, or you can cut and paint the stem with glyphosate in late fall to early winter when other plants are entering dormancy. This is a little more obvious around that point in time because it is semi-evergreen, and you're going to see these leaves stick out when other things are dormant. So another reason invasives were brought to the U.S. is for their screening ability. Elaeagnus pungens on the left-hand side, their silverthorn, is also known as ugly Agnes. This is used as an evergreen hedge and barrier, and boy, does it do a good job at that. It's often seen in highway medians. It spreads by animal dispersal of seeds. It's resistant to drought, salt spray, pollution, and damage by deer. You could say it's pretty bulletproof, right? Very fast growing. The size of the plant increases by prolific stem sprouts growing up to 25 feet tall. It has thick leaves, which are silvery green-brown underneath. The branches have a half an inch long thorn. It completely covers smaller shrubs and trees and displaces native vegetation. And here on the right side, we have Ligustrum sinensis. And note that both of these plants, we've got the red light still on these. They produce prolific, sweet cream flower clusters at the end of branches in April through June. You'll see these a lot on social media, like, wow, what is the wonderful smell I'm smelling? And here you go. It's Chinese privet. But what you don't see is the little tiny saplings or little growths that come up from this all over the place because birds are depositing these everywhere. In my yard, if I'm pulling something out, it's most likely going to be a little piece of privet. And once you know what they look like, you'll see them everywhere. Birds eat the seeds, which then create unwanted privet in other places. Its loose branching shades native understory plants. It likes sun and shade equally. Studies have shown that an increase in the number of species of pollinators in an area where privet has been removed. So as soon as this plant's gone, those pollinators come back immediately. So the good news is every effort you make at getting rid of these plants is helpful. Here we've got Chinese holly on the left-hand side. Rotunda is the variety of this one is here. It comes from China and other locations in Asia. Self-fertile, no male plant is needed for pollination with this plant. Rapidly spreads as birds and animals eat the berries and deposit them elsewhere. This is really popular around Christmas time due to the abundant bright red berries you'll see on it. To identify the non-native holly version, take a look at the leaf. If the leaf looks like a flying squirrel, most likely it is the non-native invasive Chinese holly. And again, to remove, cut this plant and paint the stem with glyphosate or dig out from the roots. The roots are going to continue to resprout for a few years after a plant's been cut down. Just continue to be diligent with it, and eventually you will get it. If you love holly, but you want to steer clear of the invasive versions, go with an American holly cultivar. And on the right, golden bamboo. How could we leave bamboo out of the mix here, right? There's a house near me that looks like it will soon be swallowed up by bamboo. It's completely surrounded. In Georgia, this invasive species can reach 40 feet tall and spread through rhizomes across your yard. I thought it was interesting. I Googled how fast does bamboo grow, and this was shocking to me. It actually put the growth rate in miles per hour. So that's how fast this plant grows. You want to steer clear of it. While it does make a good screen, I would avoid it at all costs. The only way to keep this contained would be in a concrete bunker. If planted in a container, it would still escape, in my opinion. There are different varieties of bamboo. I've been told that silver striped bamboo and sea breeze bamboo are clumping varieties, much less likely to be considered invasive. I would never choose a running variety of bamboo. If you have to choose any variety, there's a clumping variety that's going to stay more compact and together. But again, I would highly suggest researching that before you even think about putting that in your landscape. And I would always put it in a container and monitor it very closely. So here we've got Vinca minor, or common periwinkle. This is one of the final reasons invasives were introduced to the US was to solve problems. So these two plants were brought here, common periwinkle and English ivy, to combat erosion. They're in the yard there. I've got some Vinca minor, and it's next to, again, some Japanese stilt grass. But that Vinca minor, I did not plant it. None of these plants I planted in my yard, but somehow they volunteered there, or a neighbor might have planted them. While it does combat erosion on this very steep hill, it's taken over, and it crowds everything else out. So there's no ability for native plants to have a good effect there. So that's a missed opportunity, in my opinion, that's planted there. And if you do try to remove the Vinca minor, you have to get it up from the roots and get it up well, because if you have cleared it on the top of the soil and the roots are still left underground, it could be years later, it would continue to sprout again. So English ivy, you see here on the right-hand side, oops, I'm sorry. It needs no introduction, English ivy. It thrives in sun or shade, forest or open areas, any kind of soil, with or without companion plants. It will grow over any plant in its way. It is an aggressive invader. It grows along the ground and into the forest canopy, strong wind. It climbs to 90 feet tall with clinging aerial roots that strangle trees. So if you see this on any trees in your yard, I've taken a machete and actually cut it off at the bottom of the, taken a machete and cut the roots off at the bottom of the tree just to disconnect it so it can't climb up any further. And then plant the stems, or I'm sorry, paint the stems with glyphosate so that it takes it to the roots and kills that plant. So here's a lengthy list of problems caused by invasive plants. By growing very vigorously, they reduce nutrients for native species. They cover over native plants, reducing their growth and flowering. This is the cost of that missed opportunity there by planting this instead of native plants. Invasive plants dramatically reduce the number and variety of insects, crucial for the health of all plants, as well as birds and butterflies. They alter native plant succession by reducing available land for natives to grow and multiply. So if the soil's covered, native seeds don't have the chance to fall and grow there and cross-pollinate, so definitely missing that opportunity. They climb trees, they might kill them, they can cause them to fall in storms. They decrease cover for wildlife due to impenetrable thickets. They are just that aggressive. They decrease the ability of soil to hold water. So native plants actually have much deeper root systems than invasive plants do. So because of that decreases the availability of water in the soil. They displace rare native plants. They may even change soil chemistry. So I read that invasive plants produce distinct organic acids and hormones that disrupt the structure of the soil microbial communities and alter patterns of nutrient cycling that favor invasive plants. So natives are not going to want to grow there once that soil chemistries change. They reduce recreational benefits by decreasing accessibility to open spaces. Where kudzu is, you don't have a park where kids can play, right? They reduce native plant diversity. They replace robust, diverse plant communities with monocultures, one huge field of kudzu instead of the numerous variety of plants that could be there in its place. And they poison animals and birds that eat their berries. Here's the good news. That sounds all doom and gloom, right? The good news is that if you pull out invasives, the natives will return. By removing those invasives, you provide the opportunity for native plants to grow in their place. So now let's imagine you've removed those invasives. What's next? Well, there's non-natives here, right? So they're a slippery slope. What seems like an innocent choice in selecting a shrub for your front yard might have bigger consequences than any of us intend. Remember, someone thought kudzu was a great idea, right? So you see here, this is yellow. We've got a yellow traffic light here on this one. We just need to make sure that we use these plants sparingly and try to, shoot for native plants if at all possible. So non-native plants and that are non-invasive, what are they? They don't fit the definition of native plants, one. They originate from somewhere else. So yes, they were imported, transplanted into the US. They have not become invasive though. And the key word here is yet. Here's a big picture of beloved Lenten roses, hellebores. I love them. They are not a native plant. Some of these do provide benefits though for us. So only about 10% of all non-native plants have become invasive. Here's the kind of scary but crazy thing. Most invasive plants have historically required from 20 to 50 years for them to reach a critical biomass that allowed them to go rogue and be considered invasive. In other words, because they are non-native, it takes time for them to reproduce, since insects and birds are not aiding in that process, because non-native plants of any kind are not the preferred food of birds and insects. So again, we see yellow light here on this one. So here's problems caused by non-native plants. This list is much shorter than our list of problems caused by invasive plants. But as you can see here, there's still a list: scarce food sources for wildlife, extinction of birds and insects, and decline of native plants. And they could become invasive, right? Oops, I'm sorry. So one of the biggest problems of non-native plants is their hosting capacity. They don't provide enough food, insects for birds and wildlife. This brief list shows that even when they've been in the US for centuries, native insects have not chosen to eat these plants. You see here down at the bottom, the common reed. The common name is called common reed. Homeland is Europe. Insects supported in Europe is 170 species. Insects supported in US is 5 species. But this plant, as you can tell in the right-hand column there, it's been here over 300 years. So the evolutionary tie of the insects to these plants, they've not been able to evolve along with these plants. So these animals and insects are not preferring that plant. So this shows us that if the native plants in our backyard decline, the birds will go elsewhere to feed themselves, because the baby birds are, dependent on insects. So again, yellow light here, but definitely concerning. So here are some examples of non-native, non-invasive plants. We've got the Camellia sasanqua from Japan, the Camellia japonica from Japan, the hellebores you saw earlier. A right-hand picture here, we've got hostas, roses, we've got daylilies. So the first colonists began a brisk trade for horticultural plants with Europe and then Asia. Our founding fathers were actually jockeying to see who had the greatest variety of exotic plants, including Washington and Jefferson. That trend continues today as we purchase items from nurseries around the world and install those plants in our very own garden. So many of the plants listed have been around so long, they even have a certain sentimentality to them, like camellias. Given that sentimentality, you would almost expect them to be native here, but they aren't. We just need to keep that in mind and try to, plant native instead. So here are more of the non-native, non-invasive plants. And some even have, good benefits, like butterfly bush came from China. It's not technically, it's considered invasive in some parts of the country, but right now it's not, it's showing signs of becoming invasive here. It is a nectar source for butterflies, but I know that the plant can't, it won't support butterflies fully in the way that it won't provide enough food for them. But it's not considered problematic at this time. So again, yellow light on this. So this is a quick chart on what is invasive and what you can plant in its place. So if you want to take a picture of this to refer back to for later, that might be good. So the Chattahoochee Nature Center also has an upcoming fall native plant sale this week where you can buy some native plants. And so some of these better choices are going to be available there as well. So here's a list of preventing the spread of invasive species. A lot of these things we don't really think about. We just, we go through life and don't really even think about these, but this is how invasive species are spread and how they go from one region to another. So clean your hiking and fishing gear. There's some hitchhikers, if you will, on your hiking shoes that you may not realize came back with you from the Grand Canyon or wherever. Just be mindful of what you might see on your shoes. Don't move firewood from its original location. Always buy firewood locally if you're going to a campsite. Fish using native bait whenever possible. Volunteer at invasive removal efforts, and Cobb County Master Gardeners have quite a few of those removal efforts going on. Talk to your local nursery when selecting plants for your garden. Clean your boat if you're transferring it to a new body of water. If you see an invasive species, report it. Learn about and be aware of those invasive species and the sightings in your area. Just plant native species in your garden. Check your pet's paws when traveling with them. Don't release aquarium fish or plants, live bait, or other exotic animals into the wild. And if planting things given to you, just monitor them for invasive species. Set aside plants before installing to determine if there are any hitchhikers. And always cover bare soil with a ground cover, mulch, or cardboard or wood chips, just to prevent the opportunity for something invasive to go there. And then throw away remaining food scraps instead of tossing when you're outdoors. There are some great resources for reporting invasive species, invasivespeciesinfo.gov. And then there are a few smartphone apps. One app is called Wild Spotter. One is called Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System, where you can help fight against invasive species in America's wild places by downloading those apps and reporting them. So here are some additional resources on invasive. Hope you learned something that will help in your gardening endeavors, especially as it relates to non-native and invasive plants in our local area. Here are some additional resources for gardeners. UGA Publications has numerous publications. You can search by keyword there. A wonderful resource for anybody that's interested in gardening.
Thank you for watching. If you would like more information, a copy of the resources used in this presentation, the questions and answers, and more about who we are and what we do, please visit our website at www.cobbmastergardeners.com.